Not every great idea turns into the next iPhone. In fact, some tech launches crash so hard they become cautionary tales, burning through money, reputations, and sometimes entire companies. Today, we're counting down the 12 biggest tech failures from the last 3 decades and breaking down exactly what went wrong. Number 12, Google Glass. 2013, the smart glasses that nobody wanted. In 2013, Google introduced something that felt straight out of a sci-fi movie, Google Glass. A sleek, futuristic pair of smart glasses with a built-in display, voice commands, and even a tiny camera. The idea? Instead of pulling out your phone, you'd get notifications, directions, and even video calls right in your field of view. Google pitched it as the next step in wearable tech, an evolution beyond smartphones. At first, the hype was massive. Early adopters known as Glass Explorers shelled out a whopping $1,500 just to get their hands on the beta version. Tech demos showed surgeons using Glass for real-time medical data, cyclists navigating hands-free, and business professionals effortlessly checking emails mid-conversation. It felt like the future, but in reality, nobody wanted it. The first red flag? The design. While Google tried to make Glass look stylish, it ended up making wearers look more like cyborgs than trendsetters. Even worse, the built-in camera freaked people out. Suddenly, anyone wearing Google Glass was assumed to be secretly recording, leading to immediate bans in bars, movies, theaters, and even entire cities. That's how the term glasshole was born. Then there was the tech itself. The tiny display was hard to read in sunlight, and the battery life was terrible. And the software? Unpolished at best. The final nail in the coffin? No real use case. While smartphones made communication and entertainment easier, Google Glass didn't actually solve a problem. It just made people uncomfortable. By 2015, Google pulled the plug on the consumer version, trying to pivot towards businesses with Google Glass Enterprise Edition. That lasted a few more years before Google officially shut it down, for good, in 2023. Today, Google Glass is remembered not as a revolutionary product, but as a cautionary tale, proof that just because something feels futuristic doesn't mean people actually want it. Number 11, the Microsoft Zune, 2006 through 2012, the iPod killer that never had a chance. By the mid-2000s, Apple's iPod had already taken over the world. Everyone had one. It was sleek, it was easy to use, and thanks to iTunes, buying and organizing music had never been simpler. But Microsoft, they weren't about to let Apple dominate digital music without a fight. In 2006, they introduced the Zune, their answer to the iPod. And to be fair, on paper, it wasn't bad. The first Zune had a bigger screen, built-in Wi-Fi, and even let you share songs with your friends wirelessly, something the iPod couldn't do at the time. Microsoft was so confident in its success that CEO Steve Ballmer went on record saying the Zune would take a huge chunk of the iPod's market. Except that never happened. Right from the start, the Zune had problems. The biggest one? It was just too late. By 2006, Apple had already spent 5 years building the iPod's dominance. Microsoft was stepping into a fight they had already lost long before they ever threw the first punch. Then there was the ecosystem problem. Apple had iTunes, a massive, well-established music store. The Zune, it had Zune Marketplace, which no one really even used. And even worse, if you already had an iTunes library, switching to Zune meant rebuying all your music. That alone was a deal breaker for most people. And then there was the brown Zune. Microsoft thought one of their main color options should be brown, because nothing says cutting-edge technology like a device that looks like an old couch. But the biggest issue, nobody wanted to leave the iPod ecosystem. Even though later Zune models were objectively better in some ways, like the Zune HD, which had a gorgeous OLED screen. By that point, it didn't even matter. The iPhone was already on the scene, streaming services were starting to take off. The idea of buying an MP3 player at all was slowly becoming outdated. By 2012, Microsoft pulled the plug on the Zune completely. The hardware was discontinued, the Zune Marketplace was shut down, and just like that, Microsoft's attempt at taking down the iPod was gone. Today, the Zune is remembered as a solid device that simply showed up too late to make a difference. It wasn't bad, it was just trying to fight a battle that had already been won. Number 10, Amazon Fire Phone. 2014, the smartphone that nobody asked for. By 2014, Amazon was already everywhere. They dominated online shopping, ebooks, and streaming, and their Kindle devices were actually really successful. So naturally, Jeff Bezos and his team figured, why not make a smartphone? Enter the Amazon Fire Phone, a device that was supposed to be Amazon's answer to the iPhone and Android flagships. It had a 3D display, a custom operating system, and deep integration with Amazon services. But there was one problem. Actually, a lot of problems. First, let's talk about what the Fire Phone actually was. Its biggest selling point was dynamic perspective, a 3D effect that responded to how you tilted the phone. Amazon hyped it up as something revolutionary, but in reality, it was just gimmicky. Instead of making the phone better, it just made navigation weird and unnecessary. Then there was Firefly, a feature that let you scan real-world objects and instantly buy them on Amazon. And right there was the real issue. This wasn't a phone designed to be the best smartphone on the market. It was designed to be a shopping machine that kept you locked into Amazon's ecosystem. And speaking of being locked in, there was no Google Play Store. That meant no Google Maps, no YouTube app, no Gmail. None of the services that Android users actually wanted. Instead, you were stuck with Amazon's Fire OS, which had a much smaller app selection. And let's not forget the price. At launch, Amazon priced the Fire Phone at $649, the same price as an iPhone 6 or a Samsung Galaxy S5. But the Fire Phone wasn't even close to competing with those devices in terms of specs, app selection, or performance. The result? A total disaster. The Fire Phone flopped so hard that Amazon took a $170 million loss on it. Just 1 year after its launch, they discontinued it completely. Amazon has done a lot of things right over the years, but the Fire Phone is a reminder that not every company needs to make a smartphone. Number 9. The Samsung Galaxy Note 7, 2016. The phone that literally exploded. By 2016, Samsung's Galaxy Note lineup was at the top of the smartphone world. It had big screens before big screens were cool, premium hardware, and of course, the S Pen, which made it the ultimate power user device. Then came the Galaxy Note 7, and on paper, it was the best Note ever. It had a gorgeous curved AMOLED screen, iris scanning for extra security, water resistance, a massive 3,500 milliamp battery for all-day use. Everything looked perfect until it started blowing up. At first, the reports started trickling in about the Note 7's catching fire while charging. Samsung reacted quickly, issuing a global recall and replacing affected units. But then, the replacement phones also started catching fire. And that's when things really fell apart. Airlines banned the Note 7 from flights, stores stopped selling it, the TSA officers were confiscating them at security checkpoints. It became the first smartphone in history to officially be blacklisted from airplanes for being a literal fire hazard. So what went wrong? Samsung had rushed the Note 7's development to beat the iPhone 7 to market. And in doing so, they pushed the battery technology too far. The battery design was flawed. Samsung tried to fit too much capacity into too thin of a frame, causing the batteries to short circuit and overheat. The result? Samsung had no choice but to kill the Note 7 entirely. The recall cost them an estimated $5.3 billion, and their reputation took a massive hit. But here's where Samsung actually did something smart. Instead of sweeping the disaster under the rug, they went all in on fixing their battery safety. They introduced an 8-point battery safety check and completely revamped their quality control process. By the time the Galaxy Note 8 launched, Samsung had rebuilt consumer trust, and the Note lineup survived until Samsung later retired it in favor of the Ultra series. But the Note 7, it'll always be remembered as the most explosive smartphone failure in history, literally. Number 8, the Apple Newton, 1993 through 1998. The PDA that was ahead of its time and also terrible. In the early 90s, Apple had a vision for the future. A pocket-sized digital assistant that could handle your contacts, calendar, and notes all without needing a traditional keyboard. They called it the Newton. It was one of Apple's most ambitious designs at the time. The idea was simple. You could write on the screen and the Newton would convert your handwriting into a digital text. It was supposed to be revolutionary. A personal digital assistant that could make your life easier and replace your paper planner. But there was one problem actually. Well, a huge problem. The handwriting recognition. The main selling point of the device barely worked. Apple promised that the Newton could accurately read anyone's handwriting, But in reality, it misinterpreted words constantly instead of making notes easier. It just turned everything into unreadable nonsense. And it wasn't just the software, the hardware wasn't great either. The Newton was bulky expensive, launching at $700, which is insane for 1993. It had terrible battery life, and on top of that, it didn't have a real ecosystem to support it. No app store, no seamless cloud syncing, just a standalone device trying to do too much. But what really sealed its fate? Apple itself. By 1997, Steve Jobs returned to Apple after being fired a decade earlier. And one of the first things he did when taking back control, kill the Newton. He saw it as an overcomplicated, underperforming product that didn't fit Apple's future. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. By 1998, the Newton was officially discontinued, but its core ideas lived on. The concept of a portable touch-based device eventually led to the iPhone and iPad, and modern Apple Pencil handwriting recognition. It actually works now. The Newton was ahead of its time, but also too early and too expensive, and just not good enough to be the game changer that Apple wanted it to be. Number 7, Google Stadia. 2019 through 2023, the future of gaming that nobody wanted. 2019, Google made a bold claim. You don't need a gaming console anymore. With Google Stadia, they promised high-end AAA gaming that could stream directly to your TV, laptop, phone. No downloads, no expensive hardware, just instant play. All you needed was a controller and a good internet connection. At first, it sounded like a game changer. No more waiting for updates, no need to buy a $500 console, just click and start playing. But just a few years later, Stadia was completely dead, shut down in 2023 after failing to gain any real traction. So what went wrong? First, the business model made no sense. Stadia wasn't like Xbox Game Pass, where you pay a subscription fee for a full library of games. Instead, Google expected people to buy full-price games individually, but those games could only be played on the Stadia. That meant if the Stadia ever shut down, which it did, you'd lose access to every game you ever bought. Second, latency was a killer. Google promised 4K gaming at 60 frames per second, but the reality, if your internet connection wasn't rock solid, Stadia games suffered from lag, frame drops, and input delay, which is a deal breaker for fast-paced games like shooters and racing titles. Third, Google had a reputation for abandoning projects. Look how many times they ended up on this list. Gamers were hesitant to invest in a service run by a company that had already killed off products like Google+, Google Glass, and countless other experiments. Just 3 years later after launch, Stadia was gone. In 2023, Google officially shut it down, refunding customers for their games and hardware, which was at least a nice move, but ultimately proving that cloud gaming just wasn't ready for the mainstream. That doesn't mean the idea is dead. Xbox Cloud Gaming, NVIDIA GeForce Now, and PlayStation Now are still pushing the concept forward. But Stadia, it'll always be remembered as the failed gaming revolution that never took off. Number 6, HD DVD. The format war that Blu-ray won before it even started. In the early 2000s, home entertainment was going through a massive shift. DVDs were great, but they weren't high definition. The industry needed a new disc format that could handle 1080p movies, surround sound, and massive storage capacity. Enter HD DVD, backed by Toshiba and Microsoft, and Blu-ray backed by Sony and nearly every major movie studio. At first, it seemed like an even fight. Both formats had huge corporate backing, both had Hollywood support, and both were battling to be the next standard in home video. But by 2008, HD DVD was dead and the Blu-ray was the undisputed winner. So what happened? First, Sony played chess while Toshiba played checkers.
This shit's chess, it ain't checkers.
Instead of just selling Blu-ray players, Sony built Blu-ray into the PlayStation 3. That meant millions of homes suddenly had a Blu-ray player by default, while HD DVD had no equivalent mass market push. Second, storage capacity mattered. A single-layer HD DVD could hold 15 gigabytes, while a single-layer Blu-ray could hold 25 gigabytes. And for movie studios, more space meant better quality and more bonus content. Third, Warner Brothers killed HD DVD overnight. In January 2008, Warner Brothers, one of the biggest movie studios, announced that they were dropping HD DVD and going all in on Blu-ray. That was the moment the format war ended. Within weeks, Best Buy, Walmart, and Netflix stopped supporting HD DVD, and by February 2008, Toshiba officially surrendered. At the time, this was one of the biggest format wars since VHS versus Betamax. But looking back, it wasn't even close. Sony stacked the deck in Blu-ray's favor, and HD DVD never stood a chance. And the irony, physical media is dying anyway. Streaming took over, 4K Blu-ray is barely holding on, and HD DVD is just a forgotten relic of a battle, ultimately, that didn't matter. Number 5, Nintendo Virtual Boy, 1995, the VR headset that gave you a headache. By the mid-90s, Nintendo was untouchable. The Super Nintendo was a massive success, and the Nintendo 64 was on the horizon, and gaming was bigger than ever. So, when Nintendo announced the Virtual Boy, a portable VR console that promised true 3D gaming, people were hyped. It was supposed to be the next evolution of gaming, a device that would pull you into the action like never before. But instead, it became one of Nintendo's biggest failures ever. The first problem, the display. Instead of a full-color VR experience, the Virtual Boy had a black and red LED display. Why? Because full-color VR was too expensive at the time. But the result was a screen that was uncomfortable to look at for more than just a few minutes. Then there was the hardware itself. Despite being marketed as a portable console, the Virtual Boy wasn't wearable. You had to place it on a table and lean into it to play. There was no head tracking, no real immersion, just a weird bulky headset that gave players eye strain, dizziness, and headaches. And the biggest issue? The games. Virtual Boy launched with a weak library. It only had 22 games total before Nintendo pulled the plug. Compared to hundreds of games on the Game Boy, it wasn't even close. By 1996, the Virtual Boy was discontinued, making it one of Nintendo's fastest failures ever. It sold less than 800,000 units, and most gamers never even saw one in person. But here's the thing, Nintendo actually learned from it. Decades later, they revisited 3D gaming with the Nintendo 3DS, which actually worked. And VR finally became reality with devices like the Oculus Rift and the PlayStation VR. The Virtual Boy was ahead of its time, but it was also rushed, underpowered, and just not fun to use. And in the end, if your console gives people headaches, they're probably not going to play it. Number 4, the Facebook Portal, 2018 through 2023. The video call device nobody trusted. By 2018, Facebook had already conquered social media. They owned Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and their messaging services were used by billions of people worldwide. So when they announced Portal, a smart video calling device with a built-in camera that could follow you around the room, it seemed like a logical next step. The idea was simple. Make video calls with easier hands-free tracking. Use AI-powered cameras to keep you in the frame. Integrate it with Alexa for smart home control. But there was just one massive problem. Nobody trusted Facebook with a camera in their home. This was right after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where Facebook was caught mishandling user data. People were already suspicious about Facebook tracking them online, so the idea of putting a Facebook-branded camera in their living room, well, that was a hard pass. And that wasn't the only issue. Portal didn't really do anything new. Amazon's Echo and Show and Google's Nest Hub already handled smart displays and video calls. But those devices also controlled smart homes, played YouTube videos, and had a ton of other functionality. Portal, it was basically a glorified Zoom machine. Even worse, Meta kept making new versions, Portal TV, Portal Go, different sizes, but none of them solved the trust problem. So no matter how much Meta tried to market it, people just didn't want to put Facebook-powered cameras in their homes. By 2023, Meta officially killed the Portal, shifting its focus towards AI and the metaverse. In the end, it wasn't just a failed product, it was a reminder that reputation matters. Because if your company is known for privacy violations, maybe don't try to sell home surveillance devices. Number 3, the Segway, 2001 through 2020, the revolutionary transport that nobody used. In 2001, the Segway was supposed to change the world. Dean Kamen, its inventor, promised it would revolutionize personal transportation, so much that some investors believed entire cities would be redesigned around it. It was marketed as a self-balancing two-wheeled electric vehicle, faster than walking, more convenient than biking, the future of urban mobility. But instead of becoming a mainstream success, the Segway became a punchline, something you'd see in tourist groups, mall cops, and comedy sketches, but nowhere else. So what went wrong? First, the price. When it was launched in 2001, the Segway cost about $5,000. That's $8,500 in today's money. That's a huge price tag for something that couldn't even replace a car. Second, it had no real place in transportation. The Segway was too slow for the road, but too bulky for sidewalks. Cities didn't know how to regulate it, and some outright banned it from public spaces. Third, the image problem. Instead of being a futuristic must-have device, the Segway quickly became associated with mall cops, guided tours, and rich tech guys who just didn't want to walk. It never caught on as a serious form of transportation. And then there was the learning curve. Despite being self-balancing, the Segway still had a steep learning curve, and plenty of people, including the owner of the company, who literally unalived himself riding one off a cliff, found out the hard way. By 2015, the Segway was bought by Ninebot, and in 2020, they officially shut down the production. The technology behind the Segway lived on in hoverboards and e-scooters, but the original device, it'll always be remembered as the most overhyped, overpriced gadget that never found its place, because at the end of the day, walking is still undefeated. Number 2, Windows Phone, 2010 through 2017. Microsoft's $7 billion mistake. By 2010, the smartphone war was already in full swing. Apple's iPhone was dominating, Android was growing fast, and Microsoft, well, they were still stuck in the past with Windows Mobile, an OS that looked and felt ancient compared to its competition. So Microsoft decided to start fresh. Enter Windows Phone, a brand new mobile operating system with a clean tile-based interface, smooth performance, and deep integration with Microsoft Office and Xbox Live. On paper, it had everything needed to succeed, but in reality, it never stood a chance. The first problem, the App Store was a ghost town. While iOS and Android had millions of apps, Windows Phone had the basics and not much else. No Instagram for years, no Snapchat, barely any banking or streaming apps, and even when big apps did come to Windows Phone, they often were half-baked versions, missing features. The second problem, Microsoft kept rebooting everything. Windows Phone launched in 2010, but by 2012, Microsoft forced users to upgrade to Windows Phone 8, which wasn't compatible with the older devices. Then came Windows 10 Mobile, another reboot that killed what little momentum they had left. Even hardcore fans were exhausted. The final nail in the coffin, the Nokia disaster. In 2014, Microsoft bought Nokia's mobile division for $7.2 billion, thinking that making their own hardware would help Windows Phone succeed. Instead, they just lost billions, fired thousands of employees, and ended up killing off the entire Nokia brand. By 2017, Microsoft had officially given up on Windows Phone, and by 2019, they stopped supporting it entirely. Looking back, Windows Phone wasn't even a bad product. It was actually ahead of its time in some ways. The Metro UI inspired modern smartphone designs, and features like live tiles were genuinely innovative. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter, because in the smartphone world, if you don't have the apps, you don't have a platform. Number 1, the Apple Car. Canceled in 2024, the $10 billion ghost of Silicon Valley. For over a decade, Apple was secretly working on something massive. Not just another iPhone or MacBook, but an actual car. Codenamed Project Titan, this was supposed to be Apple's big move into the auto industry. The plan? To create a fully autonomous electric vehicle that would revolutionize transportation just like the iPhone did for mobile tech. These rumors were wild. Some reports said it wouldn't even have a steering wheel. Others claimed it would have AR windshields, next-level AI, and a design straight out of a sci-fi movie. But after 10 years and billions of dollars in R&D, countless leadership shakeups, Apple had nothing to show for it. So what went wrong? First, Apple never figured out what the car was ever supposed to be. Early, they wanted a full-on self-driving car. No pedals, no wheel, just an AI-powered pod. But when self-driving tech proved way harder than expected, Apple kept changing directions. One year, they were making a full vehicle. The next, they were just making software for other companies. Then they wanted to compete with Tesla directly. Second, Apple had no experience building cars, unlike Tesla, which built its own factories. Apple relies on outside manufacturers, but big automakers like Hyundai and BMW didn't want to just become another Apple supplier. They wanted a partnership, not an arrangement where Apple takes all the credit. Third, the industry moved on without them. While Apple was stuck in development hell, Tesla, Rivian, and even traditional automakers kept pushing forward with EVs and self-driving tech. By the time Apple was even close to having a real prototype, the market was already saturated. In early 2024, Apple officially canceled the project and shifted resources to AI. A decade of work, billions of dollars spent, and not a single car was ever built. Could Apple still enter the car industry someday? Maybe. But for now, the Apple Car joins a long list of overhyped tech projects that never made it past the drawing board. So what do you think? Did I get them all? Was I wrong about any? Hit the like button, the subscribe button, and ring that notification bell. That way you can be advised when I drop more content. YouTube thinks you're going to like this video right here. Go ahead and click that, and I'll see you over there.